All right. Good morning. Welcome, everyone, and welcome, Colleen, aka my other sister. One of my other
How
sisters.
many are there?
Another sister. There are a few. They're all great. And yeah, I am happy to have you here. So we're in our little Advent season kick, and Advent has begun this week. Um, and it just occurred to me, well, Colleen actually, I reached out to Colleen and was like, you want to sign up for this thing that I'm doing? But you did. And so I just thought we could chat a little bit about like what um, what the landscape of your life looks like now and why practicing Advent with me or in any form is something that was interesting enough for you to to sign up. And you were also there this week. So I thought we could hear a little bit about if you had any reflections on how the first week went for you. But before we go into that, maybe you could just give us a little bit of context for you, like what's your life look like right now? Like what's your ecology? I like your plant, little plant friend. Where are you, and what's happening in this season of life for you?
Sure. Yes. Hi, everybody. I'm Colleen. I am here in Seattle. I work in labor rights organizing. So I consider myself a working activist, an anti-racist, a sister, a daughter. And I think in this time of year, I am often busier than I want to be, especially with work as things like slow down. And then obviously just with holidays, things often seem very overwhelming. It can be overwhelming. And I've kind of found myself, especially as we've sort of been moving through COVID times, just having different needs around my social battery that maybe didn't exist before or I just didn't pay attention to before. Kate knows I'm always a pretty like social active person. I like having a full schedule.
Colleen's our party planner.
I'm the party planner. And I think that has often felt like kind of a part of my identity for a lot of my life. And
being a socialite, being extroverted.
yeah, that felt like it felt right. It felt like it kind of defined some of who I was. And I think COVID was really hard for many reasons.
We'll get an amen.
And I was like, where do we go? What do we do? There's a point to where I'm going with this, which is that I think this year especially, I have been really desiring kind of a balance of both of those things, of like the joy and like love and connection I have and like to feel with people in being a very social person, but also kind of the like quietness and stillness that we sort of had to sit with during COVID. So that's kind of where I'm at in my life.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Yeah. So given that, was there something besides trying to support your big sis that initiated like what felt interesting for you about holy darkness or observing Advent in this time? And maybe if there's anything you want to say, like what do you remember about Advent growing up, or why this was a time that we celebrated?
Yeah, I have always really liked traditions, which I think you know.
Yes.
And
yes.
like rituals. And I think as growing up, it was because I liked that it had people gathering. And
Yeah, everyone was coming
for
home
folks,
from college.
yeah, for folks who don't know, I'm the youngest sister, so I got abandoned every time people went to school. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, I definitely kind of feel like Advent was a time when people came home, or at least part of that. Um, O Come, Emmanuel is like burned into my my waking and dream life. It's a good song, but I yeah, so I would say just kind of like have always liked the ritual of like the Advent wreath and kind of the weeks leading up to Christmas, and have not really felt connected to doing that in like a Catholic space for many years, or being in like a Catholic church, and have been kind of figuring out like, okay, what's a way that I can still um, hold on to some rituals without kind of being in a space that maybe doesn't feel authentic, or doesn't feel like it represents me, or um, isn't maybe the model that I want anymore in my life. Um, and I think that my initial sort of response to that in previous years has just been like, well, who needs it? Like, I'll just take it out completely. Um, but that didn't feel right either, I think. And just wanting to explore kind of what other ways of that, holding on to some of that tradition and connection could look like in this time of year. And because the years that I did that, I also didn't love that it was sort of like before I knew it, it was Christmas Day and then it was New Year's Day. It kind of felt like the passing of time went differently. I didn't have as many markers to sort of like have contact points throughout the year, and especially throughout like this time of year. So yeah, I think just like trying to have some other connection and even accountability of like, okay, here we are each week, or even the ask of like each day trying to do something. I'm definitely a person that I always did team sports. I never did individual things. So
Yeah, I mean, that stood out to me in your comment on, I don't know if you want to talk about that, but you made a comment on Monday, like we did this meditation about looking, like, being on a pilgrimage, kind of looking out on the path and imagining how it looks for us, right? And kind of seeing what's ahead. And maybe it was the question like, what would feel like sustenance for the journey? And I think it was you who first said was like, not doing it alone.
yeah, people.
Yeah. Human
Exactly.
companionship. Yeah. hmm Definitely. I think you got a lot of, you had a chorus of affirmation of other people that, yeah, I think
Yeah.
it is such a, I don't know, kind of balancing act, because there are, real, there's times of like just circumstance of true aloneness. I think many people experience that over the pandemic. And then just through life, like things that we will go through. I think about this in terms of just my experience of cyclical depression. Like the experience of it is solitary, no matter if I'm surrounded by people or not. Like, so there are things that we go through that are solitary, and um, I think being on kind of the other end of the spectrum, the like relational spectrum to you, like for me, needing to learn that I don't have to do things by myself, or like that some of those touch points can alleviate some of the intensity of things that we just will go through alone. Um, and and maybe that this is not, I don't put words to your experience, but for folks, um, maybe entering into more of that interior space or the solitary journey, like to have we do need enough touch points, relational touch points, in order to make it feel okay enough to go into that place.
Mhm.
Otherwise, it's just like the void. The-
Yeah.
um, yeah,
Yeah, or it's sort of like what I feel sometimes is like, am I doing it right? Like,
yeah,
am I, you kind of, it's nice to hear like someone else say, oh yeah, this was hard for me, or this was um weird, or I tried to do 5-minute meditation and I couldn't think of, I was
yeah,
totally distracted, or just like hearing a little bit of the encouragement of like, okay, cool. That that's how it is for me too,
yeah.
and
Some normalization.
not having so much, yeah, complete like isolation. And I have, I mean, kind of relatedly, have started living alone for the first time in my life in the past. Now it's been a year. Um, but I do think that that has been another big kind of motivation for me to find some like guided practices or like new um rituals, and figuring out like how to implement those into my life alone as well.
Mm-hmm, hmm.
Very different than living with like 3 other roommates where you have their habits too. You can track their traditions.
Absolutely. Yeah. Or five other siblings.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Is this the first time you've ever lived alone?
Yeah.
Oh, dang.
3
Yeah.
years. I know.
Yeah. Is there anything else you've been reflecting on since Monday, or anything that stayed with you? Um, Anything you were surprised by? Like, I know you've actually never. I don't think you've ever taken any class or anything with me,
I
but
don't think I have.
except for
Yeah.
yoga way back in the
I
day.
just I just get unsolicited phone calls.
Unsolicited.
Always solicited. It's usually me being like, "Help." Um, but yeah, well, I just loved you read us the poem, a poem,
Mhm.
and I think I had jotted down a line in it that talked about when lightness doesn't feel enough, turn to the darkness, something
Mm,
along those lines.
mm,
Um, and that's something I've kind of been sitting with, because I do feel like really coming through COVID and kind of having new, maybe just like time, but also things to think about, reflect about my own identity and my and self and all of this, but like, and also living alone, and just thinking a lot about um yeah, what is my own lightness and darkness. And again, being typically having been an extroverted person, a very social person, I think I've always been a very like optimistic and positive person, which can annoy people.
What?
um now that you mention it. um but I have
We're
definitely
annoyed only
felt,
because we're jealous.
yeah, like how does she do it? um but I have felt a lot more of the darkness in myself in the past couple of years, especially. And um so I think like that line struck me, and just sort of the concept of like how to feel about that, or like how to, and maybe the first my first reaction having been like, what's wrong, or like what's going on here, kind of. But really, at least like what I heard in the first session was like, bring in the darkness, like let's go. And that can be just as much a part of my identity as anything else. And what are ways that I can like cultivate that and understand it, and um need it too, so
Yeah,
it's kind of something
as
that,
part of like what makes us a balanced
yeah.
human ecosystem. I'm curious, and no need to go into detail if you don't want to, but when you say like seeing the darkness or encountering the darkness in yourself, is there anything in particular that means for you, or um,
Yeah, I mean,
I mean, you don't have to bear all. Just like what, whatever you want to say.
well, in 5th grade, no, how far back do you wanna go? Um, yeah, I mean, I definitely struggled with my mental health during COVID in ways that I had not ever experienced, which I know a lot of people did, and just the extreme kind of difference that my days were during the shutdown, especially lockdown, and I really think that I what I was feeling at the time and still kind of feel, but again, it's sort of something I'm kind of like have been able to take a step back from a little bit more. But I think that because so much of my day to day was like seeing people, it was being out, it was dancing, it was seeing the family, it was like being with the kids. When all of that shut down, I had a long period of time where it was like, what is left for
Mhm,
like, what is left of who I am or
mhm,
my identity or what? And that was like very intense, I think. Um, and
mhm,
those were definitely period. And on top of that, I was like having conflict in my home because we're all stuck there, and I had a
mhm.
lot of roommates and I love them dearly. And it was very challenging to be in that kind of
Absolutely.
space. And so really feeling like all aspects of myself were kind of crumbling,
Mhm,
and also my home. And so, yeah, it was a lot. And I think it sort of additionally felt like anything I had used before to be a release or a support or whatever, like none of those avenues were really available to me anymore,
yeah.
whether it was other friends or even like other community groups that nothing had quite moved online yet. My Zumba class, like we eventually met outside, but that took several
Wait,
months. So it was like any
I wanna
outlet.
make a Zoom and Zumba pun,
Well,
but it doesn't quite.
we did get there eventually. We started doing it on Zoom. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that was just like definitely some dark times.
Mhm,
And I've obviously feel very fortunate it wasn't like my health was okay for much of it, and um a lot of other things, but yeah, I did feel like everything kind of flipped on its head.
mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I imagine I don't well, what's coming to mind, because I was thinking about before you said it, I was like, "Oh, yeah," like, all of your kind of points of nourishment and the things that, like, really gave you juice in life were pulled out.
Yeah.
And for some reason, what's reminding me of I is going so I don't know if you'll remember this, but I went to, New Orleans after, like it was probably, like, 6 months or, like, at least 4 months. It was our spring break in college
Mm,
after Katrina, and one of the things I was kind of aware of and studied at that, um, around that trip was, like, how the food system, um, had to adapt when, like, all the roads and channels of commercial food were completely annihilated.
mm,
And um, what was so stark when we were there was like, yeah, there was one location in like a Walmart parking lot where folks could, and this was again months later, but folks could go get, um, like emergency rations or whatever, canned goods. And then there was also like this hodgepodge sort of circus community that had sprung up on this other side of town, like, and they were starting to rehabilitate soil to grow like a again organic community garden, and the I guess why it's coming up is around like, these sort of, um, you kind of see the strength of a system when um, when it faces challenge like that. I mean, those are enormous challenges, right? Enormous traumas, like, um, and the neural network of how resources are exchanged, how nourishment is received, how, even how waste like is cleared, like that it's totally disrupted. And you kind of have to be like, okay, so where can those threads of connection exist already, or reform in a quick enough manner to keep the system alive? And it's usually not the ways that we had been doing it before. Like,
Definitely not.
so yeah, I mean, I'm really, just from the outside, I'm seeing what you're describing as like, okay, these were my channels of like kind of lifeblood, and now they're not there, and you're having to really like go deeper and be like, where does my actual lifeblood come from?
Yeah,
Um,
for sure. And I think just like there were so many interesting like waves of things that happened throughout that time too, like the banana bread cooking wave, like everyone everyone was making banana bread. And
Sourdough, yeah.
I remember at the
We
time
went from sourdough to like abolish the police.
yes, it was. So it was sort of this like it was so, I mean, looking back, it's really fascinating too. But I remember in that first section of like, I don't wanna it was sort of like everyone trying to figure out where my
I
connection
don't want to
is,
cook banana
like
bread.
yeah. But I was like, I don't wanna make banana bread. I don't wanna learn to crochet. Like, I don't wanna do any of those things.
I thought you
But
did get into macrame.
I tried. But I was listening to I I'm reading a book from my book club. It's Intimations by Zadie Smith, and it's like short excerpts kind of, but she's writing about COVID, and she talks about just like how even when we were doing nothing, everyone was doing something. Um which just was interesting, and I remember that kind of impulse of like, I need to keep myself busy or connected.
Or I will die of anxiety.
What do I do?
Yeah.
Right, and then after the murder of George Floyd, and just every kind of wave of uproar that followed that, and also thinking about how that probably would not have played out the same had we not been in a global shutdown, and like what was it about that sort of lining up that really took people from, I need to make banana bread to I'm hitting the street, and I had a connection to what you were saying from all this, but now I can't remember what it was. But I think just the concept of like, yeah, when we have all of these things that are kind of severed.
Well, you were saying I don't want to make banana bread. Like you were looking for like, okay, what is the thing that's going to actually sustain?
Right. And it wasn't necessarily like those trends,
Mm-hmm.
um, but yeah, interesting time.
Mm-hmm. It's funny. I'm also now reading the first book that I've read that takes place in the last 2 years.
Mm.
and it starts just in the winter of 2019, and it's so bizarre to that's now history or something, like,
Yeah.
the start of the pandemic, uprising, all that is, like, that's now history, and it's
Yeah.
like, it's like pop culture history, or this isn't really pop culture, but
Like, people born this year didn't live through that.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's that's yeah, that I mean, we are gonna be processing that for a long time. Yeah.
definitely.
Okay. Yeah. That's interesting. I was not expecting this conversation to go that way, but that's great. And that's what I love about just being able to ask the question and see where you take us. Um, Maybe we can just close with like anything else you would want someone who's curious or unsure but interested in Holy Darkness or just in Advent, like anyone who anything you would want someone to know. Um,
Yeah. Well, I will say I was, like, pleasantly surprised. I don't know what I was expecting necessarily. Like, I know you, and I so I was sort of like, "Okay, it'll be a little witchy and a little, like, all the good things." Um, but I was very pleasantly surprised to sort of see folks there just really in a range of, like, again, I think wanting connection, wanting kind of to build on something, and also we kind of had in common, like, a little bit of hesitancy about traditional churches and Catholicism, and, like, um, that felt that was a pleasant surprise to see that we sort of had many reasons kind of in common for
mm,
coming together in that space.
mhm.
And I do think that's a different way to be in a space with each other, where you all kind of have some shared history or understanding in many different ways, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
but because I went to Catholic university and, like, have been in other spaces where I sort of wanted to come in it, with this common understanding, but also be like, can we talk about some of the other things, or like my questions or doubts or whatever? And it can sometimes feel hard when you don't think anyone else is in that place with you.
yeah,
So I think there was a little bit of a relief for me to be like, oh, people are really coming at this from a variety of experiences and hurt and hope and all of that combined. And so it's sort of like, come as you are, would be my message for people,
yeah.
and you can lay down if you want to during it. So that's really
Take a nap.
good. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, that's one of the beauties of Zoom, really. But what that was making me think of is like, and we can wrap it up here, but so much of kind of traditional church, especially the way Christianity has formed in the dominant culture in the West, there's a lot of qualifications. It's built around common creed or common belief, um, and so what brings us together, what the kind of marker of belonging is like, I believe in one God, the Father, the Almighty, creator of heaven and earth, da, 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 da.
Mhm.
And I don't actually think that that is representative of the actuality, especially in Catholicism. Um, but there's sort of a culture around that, and what I was hearing you describe, and what I really hope for myself, I think, or what's been more nourishing for me is like having common practice, like being brought together around common practice, and maybe even what you're describing, like the commonality of doubt and questions, and
Mhm.
um like, not that is there something else, so a kind of gathering around the fireplace of that holds a different sort of, I don't know, frequency or something. Can you still see me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. My computer just did something weird.
Okay.
Anyway, just that's been a more nourishing approach for me than, because then it becomes kind of an intellectual, you know, like what's common is kind of this intellectual idea,
Mm.
or belief as an idea. What that can often happen, instead of like, let's try these things. And that's what a lot of the like kind of more mystical traditions or esoteric traditions, or like, um the yogis or whatever, are like, we have common practice, and it's given rise to a vision the of creation, or an orientation towards the world that we now share in common. But
Mhm.
um yeah, starting with practice over belief.
Yeah.
So cool. Yeah, come as you are. Come take a nap. Come lay down or
Yeah.
dance around, or whatever suits you. Cool. Well, thanks, Cobb. Really sweet to hear from you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah. And see you next week. And yeah, folks who are listening or watching this later, you can still join Holy Darkness through the end of this week. So happy to fold you in. All right. Thanks, Cobb.
Bye, everyone.